The shot was sharp. It was final, and I was already moving when I saw her. Alara Vance, frozen by a service door, her face went white as paper. A civilian in a place she never should have been. I saw the shock in her eyes. She was gonna scream. I crossed the hall in 3 strides, my hand clamped over her mouth before a sound could escape. Her panic was instant. She jerked back against me with a muffled cry. She was strong, but untrained. I felt her heart hammering against my arm. I saw a silver locket jumping at her throat. For a second I smelled her hair clean against the garlic and old wine of the restaurant. Then I focused. Silas Croft's men would be coming for a witness. This hallway was a death trap. I locked my arm around her waist and pulled her off her feet. She kicked out. Her heel connected with my shin hard. A bolt of pain shot up my leg. I gritted my teeth and kept moving. Her fingers scrabbled at my wrist, but my grip was iron. I needed her silent. I needed her safe. Even if she fought me for it. I shouldered open a service closet door and dragged us inside. Dark. It smelled of bleach. I kicked the door shut with my heel, sealing us in blackness. I pressed her against a shelf of linens, my hand still firm over her mouth. Her struggles slowed. Then they stopped. Her breathing came in fast, shallow hitches against my palm. Her terror had gone quiet. I could feel it in the stillness of her limbs. The burn from her heel still pulsed in my leg. In the dark, my first breath tasted of ammonia and lemon bleach. I kept my voice low in her ear. "I'm going to let you go. You stay quiet. Not if you understand." Her body was rigid against mine for several long seconds. Then she gave one sharp nod. I released her and stepped back. I hit a shelf of plastic bottles. They rattled loud in the confined space. The thin line of light under the door outlined her shape, pressed against the far wall. "You have no right," she whispered. Her voice shook with fury. I saw the glint of her locket, rising and falling with her quick breaths. "Silas Croft's men are in the dining room right now," I told her. "They're looking for your brother, Leo, over the debts he owes." "He's just a kid," she shot back. "He made a mistake." "Silas doesn't see a difference between a mistake and a threat," I said. "The cash, the gun, the scars, none of it is normal. You need to understand that." I heard her breath catch. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want to help. I can get Leo out of the city, tonight." She was silent, then her question came, flat and cold. "What's the price?" Before I could answer, the door handle rattled. Violently. A man's voice grumbled right outside the thin wood. "Thought I heard something back here." Alara's hand shot out in the dark. She grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug into my forearm, not in fear, but a silent demand for my attention. Her touch was a sudden, warm anchor in the cold dark. I moved on instinct. I pulled her behind me and reached for the knife in my boot. I pressed my back against the doorframe, ready. The handle jiggled again, then it stopped. Footsteps retreated down the hall. The immediate danger passed, but something had shifted. Permanently. She was in my world now. I turned to her. In the sliver of light, her eyes were wide, but her chin was set, determined. She still held onto my arm. She did not let go. I put the knife away. The sharp scent of bleach still clung to the back of my throat, stubborn as a memory. My boots crunched on fresh gravel in a quiet driveway. We stood outside a small house, a safe distance from the city. Alara stood beside me. She looked at the house with empty eyes. The wind tugged a strand of hair across her cheek. She didn't push it away. "It's secure," I said. My voice sounded flat in the quiet. "For how long?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. I turned to face her. She finally looked at me. Her gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't scared. It was just tired. That was worse. I saw the question there. Why me? Why this? I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing the empty space where my cigarette should have been. The motion stopped halfway. I just stood there with my hand useless at my side. She noticed. Her eyes tracked the movement, then returned to my face. "Croft's men were there for your brother," I said. The words were too direct. I hadn't meant to say it like that. Her breath hitched. I saw her shoulders tighten under her coat. "I have people looking for him," I added. "He's not with them yet." She searched my face. "Why would you do that?" I looked away from her. I looked at the gray shingles of the house instead. The truth was simple and ugly. I dragged her into the dark because the light was a lie. Out that door meant leaving her to them. In here, with me, she had a chance. I couldn't say that. "Because he wasn't supposed to be there tonight," I said. It was the same frustrated admission I'd made in the closet. It was all I had. The space between us was electric and still. I could see the faint dusting of freckles across her nose. She was shivering in the cold air. I didn't move to touch her. I didn't step back. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Something passed between us in that silence. It was the heavy weight of a choice not yet made. The morning sun felt weak and cold on my skin. I moved toward the door, and the ghost of what she'd been about to say moved with me. Real quick, if you're here for the tension and the escape, hit subscribe. Trust me, it gets more complicated. Her breath was a phantom warmth on my cheek as I guided her down the alley behind the Gallo Rosso. My sedan idled, exhaling a plume that stank of exhaust and damp brick. I kept my grip on her arm. Her steps were stiff on the cracked asphalt. The alley was empty except for a single buzzing sodium light. I opened the passenger door. She hesitated, looking at the car like it was a cage. "Get in, Alara," I said, my voice low and tight. "Where is my brother?" Her words were clear and direct, despite the fear in them. "He's safe for now. This car is not. We need to move." She didn't move. "You dragged me in here because Silas was there. Why? Why do you care if he sees me?" I felt a sharp pull in my side from the knife wound. I masked the wince by shifting my weight. "Because he uses what people love," I said. "He would use you to get to Leo, or to get to me. I won't let that happen." "So this is about your business," she said, her voice holding a bitter edge. "No." The word came out harder than I meant. I saw the confusion in her eyes, the conflict. I saw the way her lower lip trembled once before she pressed her mouth into a firm line. That small, vulnerable movement was why I'd pulled her behind me in the first place. A delivery van turned into the far end of the alley, its headlights cutting through the gloom. "That's not one of mine," I said. I pushed her into the car, not gently, and shut the door. I moved fast around to the driver's side. The van accelerated toward us, its engine grinding loud in the narrow space. I threw the sedan into gear just as the van's side door slammed open. A man leaned out, silhouetted against the interior light. He was holding something long and dark. I slammed my foot on the gas. The sedan lurched forward as the first shot shattered our rear window. But why the van's side door had opened before it even stopped, I still had no answer for that. The ghost of her perfume clung to my collar, a floral scent turned cloying. Sunlight cut sharp angles across the precinct's waiting room. I kept a firm hand on her elbow as we moved toward the rear exit. Alara walked beside me, her movements wooden. Her gaze stayed fixed on the double doors ahead. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and dust. I pushed the heavy metal door open with my shoulder, and we stepped into the alley. The sudden brightness made me blink. Crushed gravel shifted under our shoes. I scanned the shadows between the brick walls. A movement caught my eye at the far end. A man in a dark jacket stepped into view, his posture all wrong. He was one of Silas Croft's men, a low-level enforcer I recognized. My grip on Alara's elbow tightened. I pulled her closer, turning us toward my car parked 20 feet away. She stumbled against me, a small sound escaping her lips. I could feel the fine tremor running through her arm. Her head turned toward the alley's mouth, toward the street and possible escape. Her whole body went still for a second, like a deer frozen by headlights. I knew that hesitation. It was the calculation of a desperate person. The man lifted a hand to his ear, speaking into a comms unit. We had seconds. I leaned down, my voice a low growl near her ear. "Do not even think about it." She twisted in my grasp, her free hand pushing against my chest. Her eyes were wide and wild now. "Let me go," she whispered, choked with panic. The man started walking toward us, his pace quickening. I didn't have time to be gentle. I shoved Alara forward against the passenger door, my body curving to shield her. The cold metal pressed against my back. I fumbled for the keys. I saw the raw fear in her eyes as she looked up at me, and for a split second I hated myself for putting it there. Then I hissed, "Now or never," and clicked the unlock button. The door locks popped up with a dull thunk. I yanked the passenger door open and pushed Alara inside. She fell across the seat with a gasp. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing off the brick walls. I rounded the hood and slid into the driver's seat, key already in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw the car into reverse and stamped on the accelerator. Gravel sprayed behind us as we shot backward. Just as I swung the wheel to turn us around, a sharp crack sounded from behind. The rear windshield spiderwebbed, a single bullet hole at its center. Alara screamed, a short, sharp sound of pure terror. I shoved the gear into drive and we surged forward, tires squealing as we escaped into the city traffic. One thing kept pulling at me: how the shooter knew which car was mine. The echo of the gunshot was still ringing in my ears when I pulled into the underground garage. The air down there tasted like damp dust and exhaust. I killed the engine in a dark corner, and the silence that followed was its own kind of pressure. Alara sat frozen beside me, her hands flat on her thighs, her knuckles white. She was taking these quick, shallow breaths, fighting not to completely break. "Out," I said, my voice rough. She didn't move. I got out, came around, and opened her door. When I pulled her from the seat, her steps were unsteady on the concrete. I kept a firm grip on her elbow and guided her toward a private elevator. Its steel doors were completely unmarked. She dug her heels in as we got close. "Where is Leo?" she demanded. Her voice was a strained whisper, but it held more rage than fear now. I didn't answer. I just pressed the call button. The doors slid open with a soft chime. I pushed her inside and followed. The elevator was a silent, polished box. I hit the only button. As the doors closed, sealing us in, she whirled on me. "Tell me." Her defiance was a brittle shell. I could see the crack in it. I could see the raw terror right underneath. I faced her and pinned her with a look I usually saved for liars and traitors. Her breath hitched. "The hit was on Councilman Vance because he was cutting a deal with Sela's Croft on my territory," I said. The words felt like stones dropped into a well. "You were never the target. Your brother was asking the wrong questions." I watched her process it. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Now you're a pawn," I finished, my voice dropping. I couldn't help it. "Silence is your only armor." She just stared at me. All her anger drained away, leaving this pale, cold dread in its place. She understood. The elevator slowed and the doors opened directly into the apartment. I ushered her out into the stark, minimalist space. It smelled like new paint and emptiness. I walked past her to the floor-to-ceiling window. I checked the blind's security seal without really seeing it. My mind was back on that van from the cannery. The side door had swung open before it even stopped. A man had jumped out, already running. He was fast. He was prepared. That wasn't a standard patrol. That was a planned intercept. They knew we were coming. The thought was a cold weight in my chest. I turned from the window. Alara stood in the center of the room, utterly still. She was looking at her own reflection in the dark glass. She looked like a ghost already. That question, who had tipped them off about the cannery, sat there between us unfinished. The pressure of her terrified silence sat like a stone between my lungs. I stood in the safe house living room, the cold from the window seeping through my sleeve. I had a burner phone in my hand. Leo Finch wasn't answering his usual line. I tried a second number I knew he used for secure drops. The call went straight to a dead tone. I ended the call and placed the phone on the kitchen table. The sound was too loud in the quiet room. Alara watched me from the shadow of the hallway. She moved into the kitchen light and sat at the small table. She pushed her own untouched mug of coffee toward me. Her voice was quiet and deliberate. "Leo hates coffee," she said. "He always drinks tea. If someone tried to grab him at his usual place, they would have used coffee. He would have been suspicious." My thumb rubbed a small scratch on the phone's casing. I didn't look up at her. "That's a stupid thing to know," I muttered, but her logic was sharp. It wasn't the fear drivel of a hostage. It was the calculation of a sister who knew her brother's habits. It was how they knew which car was his. They'd watched his routine. They'd used his patterns against him. I kept my face blank. She was getting too close to the operational truth. "Is it stupid?" she whispered. The kitchen felt too small then. I could see the pulse in her throat. Her eyes were fixed on my hands. They weren't wild anymore. They were desperate and intelligent. I finally met her gaze. A flicker of something like frustration moved through me. It wasn't pity. It was the recognition of a mind I'd seriously underestimated. "Your brother was asking questions about Croft," I said, my voice low and stripped of its earlier command. I didn't look at her as I said it. "That makes him a target, not a coincidence." I stood up so fast my chair scraped the tile floor. The sound was a blade between us. That moment of almost connection shattered. I walked to the sink and braced my hands on the cold steel edge. I put the solid metal table between our bodies. The city lights glowed beyond the dark glass. She didn't move. She didn't speak. The weight of the unspoken truth hung in the air between us, heavy and still. The rest made sense. What I'd seen in her eyes just before I turned away didn't. The silence from the hours in that chair had settled into a deep ache behind my eyes. I stood in the safe house kitchen, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator against the coming dawn. I checked the spare pistol from my waistband and strapped a knife to my ankle. Alara watched me from the shadowed hallway. Her fingers were pressed white against the door frame. "I'm going out," I said. "You stay. The door locks from the outside." She moved into the kitchen's dim light. "Take me with you. I can help. I know places he'd go." Her voice was a frantic whisper. She stepped forward and grabbed the sleeve of my jacket. Her touch was a sudden, warm pressure through the leather. I shook her off, my movement sharp. "You're a loose end, not a partner." I pulled a burner phone from my pocket and placed it on the cold granite counter. "This number only, for emergencies. He's my priority now, too." I saw the protest form on her face. I cut her off before she could speak. "One peep and you'll bring Silas's men right to us." She moved to block the apartment's main door. "I am not staying in this cage." Her chin lifted, a stubborn defiance in her tired eyes. I closed the distance between us. I placed my hands on her shoulders. I felt the tension in her muscles through her thin shirt. I moved her aside with a gentle but firm pressure. My thumbs brushed the line of her collarbones for a second. "Croft's men are hunting anyone connected to last night. In here, you're a ghost. Out there with me, you're a beacon." I opened the door and stepped into the concrete corridor outside. I did not look back at her face. I pulled the heavy steel door shut behind me. The first deadbolt slid home with a solid thunk. Then the second, then the third. I stood there for a moment, listening. I heard nothing from inside. I turned and walked toward the elevator, the echo of my own steps my only company. Why she didn't make a sound when the third bolt slid home. I wasn't going to like the answer. The ghost of my own grip on her shoulders still ached like a pair of fresh bruises. The only sound in the apartment's new dark was the frantic skittering of a mouse inside the wall. I was at the window, watching the empty street, when a black sedan with tinted windows pulled to the curb. It did not turn off its lights. My hand went to the gun at my back. The driver's door did not open. This was not a delivery. This was a reconnaissance. I turned from the window. "Croft's scouts," I whispered to the woman huddled on the sofa. Her head snapped up. I crossed the room in 3 strides. I grabbed Alara's arm and pulled her to her feet. Her skin was cold under my fingers. "We go now, no talking." I saw the terror in her eyes, but also a sudden sharp focus. She did not fight my grip. She nodded once, a quick jerk of her chin. I guided her toward the kitchen and the service door beyond it. The metal fire escape was freezing under my palms. I helped Alara onto the platform and pointed down. A trash can clattered in the alley below. We both froze. I pushed her behind the bulk of a dumpster on the first landing. We crouched there in the stench of rotting food. I listened. Alara pressed both hands over her mouth. Her panicked breaths were silent, but her shoulders shook. My own breathing was a controlled, quiet rhythm in the cold air. I watched the slice of the alley mouth. The patrol car rolled past the entrance without slowing. Its red taillights faded. I let out a slow breath that clouded in the air. But my eyes kept scanning the deeper shadows of the alley. Where did the scout from the sedan go? I kept a firm hand on Alara's back. I guided her down the next flight of rusted steps. We moved toward the back of the adjacent building. And then I saw it. A thin red laser beam spanned the gap between 2 railings ahead. My man had missed it, an alarm trigger. I stopped. Alara bumped into me. She followed my gaze. I felt her stiffen. Then without a word, she raised a trembling hand. She pointed a single finger directly at the red beam. Her eyes met mine. In them I saw not just fear, but a clear, urgent warning. She had seen it too. She understood. I gave her a sharp, assessing look. This changed things. I nodded once. I turned us around, back up a few steps, and pointed to a different window ledge for our crossing. Why she had pointed at the beam with such urgent recognition. I'd been wrong to ignore it this long. The tightness in my chest from holding my breath at the tripwire didn't ease, until the armored SUV's engine settled into a low, armored hum. My knees pressed against the cold metal floor of the cargo bay as we rolled to a stop in the industrial park's pre-dawn silence, broken only by a distant, dripping pipe. I slid the heavy door open and stepped onto cracked asphalt. The air smelled of ozone and wet concrete. Alara Vance, the civilian woman I was protecting, climbed out behind me. She leaned against the SUV's flank. Her whole body trembled like a plucked wire. "They almost had us," she said. Her voice was thin and frayed. I kept my eyes on the empty lot between the warehouses. I watched the shadows for movement. "They didn't see you, that's what matters." I said the words flat and clean. It was the only truth that counted. She stared at me. The city's glow lit the side of her face. "Does this ever stop?" I finally looked at her. The question hung in the damp air. My jaw locked as the old scar through my eyebrow pulled tight. "No." The word was a hard final thing. "You saw a ghost. Now you live in a haunted house. There's no walking out." I turned my back to her. The magazine slid out of the spare pistol from my belt with a soft click. It was still full. She hugged her arms around herself. The gesture was small against the vast industrial dark. "You're a ghost too, then?" Her words were not a question. I did not deny it. What was the point? I was the thing that haunted this world. I built my territory on order. Sela's Croft, my rival, thrived on chaos. Her brother stumbled into the storm between us. I looked at her across the roof of the car. She was waiting for an apology I could not give. My world had almost killed me once. It would try again. I nodded toward a single distant streetlight. Its halo was a faint orange bruise against the gray sky. "We move," I said. My hand rested on the car door handle. I did not open it yet. The space between us felt charged and still. She did not look away. Why my hand had stopped on the car door handle? That wasn't going away. The cold pressure of the armored seat still gripped the small of my back like a phantom hand. Dawn bleached the world gray as we stepped into the stale, coffee-scented air of a storage office. All our regular places were burned. I looked at the row of garage bays. "We have one option left," I said. I led Alara to a side door and knocked. Two short, too long, then one short. The pattern was old but binding. The door opened a crack. An old man named Joe peered out. His eyes, pale and watery, widened when he saw Alara beside me. "Dante," he said. He didn't open the door wider. "A civilian, this is not what we agreed." He blocked the doorway with his thin frame, his arms crossed over a stained work shirt. The smell of old motor oil leaked out from behind him. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. The air felt thick. "The oath was for any favor, any time," I said. "This is the time, one night." Joe's face tightened. He looked past me at Alara. I saw a flicker of pity in his gaze. That pity was worse than anger. It meant he saw a dead woman walking. He knew the rules. A civilian brought in was marked forever. Joe's shoulders slumped in defeat. He stepped aside. 2 days, he muttered. No more. The room inside was a single dusty space above the garage. A small table held a cold coffee pot. Alara stood perfectly still in the center of the room. She looked like a piece of furniture waiting to be stored. I placed my spare pistol on the table with a solid thud. I finally took my eyes off the grimy windows and turned to her. My next words would change everything between us. "This is the last favor I do for free," I said. Her gaze met mine, resigned and sharp. "From here, you work with me, not just hide. You'll follow my orders without question. You'll tell me everything you know about Leo's research." That's the price. The adrenaline from the standoff with Joe still buzzed like a low-voltage current in my mouth. My first breath inside the chilled unit filled my lungs with the cloying scent of cedar planks and new silk. I watched Alara as she stared at the shrouded racks around us. Her fingers traced the plastic cover on a garment bag. Joe, the nervous warehouse manager, wrung his hands by the heavy door. He was a small man swallowed by his own storage labyrinth. "One night, Dante. That was the deal," he said. His voice was a thin wire about to snap. I pulled a thick envelope of cash from my jacket, his eyes fixed on it with a mix of greed and terror. "For your discretion," I said. I placed it in his damp hand. He stuffed it into his pants pocket without counting it. He muttered about his cleanup costs at the nightclub last week. Alara went very still at the mention of the club. "That kid, Ricky the Pencil," Joe said. He glanced at Alara and then back to me. "Croft's courier. Got creative with his math is all." He wouldn't say another word. He backed out and slammed the door shut. I heard the heavy lock click into place. Alara turned from the racks to face me. The cold air raised fine hairs on her arms. "A courier," she said. Her voice was hollow. "Not a councilman, not a whistleblower, a thief." I saw her piece it together. The shooting she witnessed was a petty punishment. It had nothing to do with her brother's politics. Her theory of a grand conspiracy crumbled in the sterile air. A flicker of something tightened my own chest. I pushed it down. "Croft doesn't tolerate disloyalty at any level," I said. I kept my tone flat. She hugged herself, not for warmth but as if holding her body together. "So Leo is in danger for asking questions about a common thief?" she asked. Her question was a challenge. I had to look away from the raw confusion in her eyes. My hand stilled on the seam of my jacket where I kept my spare pistol. I didn't answer her right away. That pause was a mistake. She noticed my hesitation. She took a small step back as if my silence was a physical threat. A shadow blocked the thin line of light under the storage unit door. 2 pairs of polished shoes stood on the other side. A familiar voice, low and respectful, cut through the quiet. "Underboss," the man said. "Report." The title hung in the cold air. Alara's breath caught. She looked from the door to my face. Her eyes searched for a denial I would not give. I moved closer to the door. "Proceed," I said. The voice on the other side was clear. Ricky the pencil was handled for skimming the Croft shipment. The message was received. His crew is contained. The facts were clean and final. I thanked the man and heard their footsteps recede. When I turned, Alara had backed into a rack of covered dresses. The plastic rustled behind her. The resignation she carried earlier was gone. It was replaced by a dawning horror. She was not looking at a protector anymore. She was looking at the man who gave such orders. The man whose territory this was. "Underboss," she repeated. The word was a verdict from her lips. I saw the exact moment her world fractured. She didn't speak. She just stared. The bond between us, that fragile thread of trust, stretched to its breaking point in the silence. Everything else I could deal with. Why I'd flinched when she said underboss was different. The silence after she said that word, underboss. It was the heaviest thing I'd ever felt. It just hung there, filling up the whole storage unit. Then her voice cut through it, flat and dead. "You protect people from a man like Croft. That is what you said. You said there was a code." She finally looked at me, and her eyes weren't even angry anymore. They were just hollow. Was any of it true? I didn't have a good answer. The truth is a blade that cuts both ways. "My territory has rules," I told her. "My people follow them. Ricky broke them. He stole from Croft, and then he tried to sell the information to me." I kept my hands loose at my sides, trying to look less like a threat. "Croft's men reached him first. The chaos from that murder covered your brother's disappearance. That's the only reason you're still standing here." She shook her head, a slow, disbelieving motion. "You just paid a man to hide a body. You called it cleanup." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You are the same." Pulse of anger tightened my throat, not at her, but at the simple, brutal truth of what she'd said. I turned away and walked to the metal door, placing my palm against the cold surface. I listened. Nothing but the hum of a distant generator. I'd left the spare pistol on the table at the safe house as a test for her. She'd passed by not touching it. Now, in this cramped space, the distance between us felt wider than the whole city. "I am what keeps the wolves from the door," I said, my back still to her. "Croft would burn this city for a profit. I maintain the walls. The cost is dirt on my hands." I heard her move then, the rustle of plastic sheeting. Then her voice came closer. "Where is my brother Dante?" I turned. She stood just a few feet away, her face pale under the harsh light. A strand of her dark hair had come loose and clung to her temple. In that moment, she didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a soldier bracing for a charge. The need to shield her from what came next was a physical ache in my chest. It was the same feeling I got looking at my sister's kids. A vow written in bone. This woman, with her clear eyes and her stubborn hope, was my fateful encounter. She was the ledger I could not balance. "He is with Croft," I said. The words were final. "We are going to get him back, and you will do exactly as I say." The cold from the warehouse floor was still in the bones of my feet as I climbed the stairs to her apartment later. The hallway carpet puffed out dust and old perfume with every step. I unlocked her door and found her standing in the middle of the living room. She hadn't slept. A faint tremor ran through her hands before she stilled them against her jeans. I placed the locked briefcase on her kitchen table. The click of the latches echoed. Inside were the tools for a clean disappearance. I laid out 2 forged passports, driver's licenses, a one-way ticket to a remote country with no extradition. I spelled out each step of the plan with cold efficiency. She watched my hands, not my face. Her silence was heavier than any argument. Then she finally moved. She backed up until a rack of her own silk garments stopped her. She shook her head once. Sharp, final, her voice was low but clear. "I'm not disappearing." She told me her brother Leo wasn't just some kid in debt. He was investigating Sela's Croft's charity. He was auditing their books. He found a discrepancy. He vanished right after he told her the numbers didn't balance. Her eyes held a fierce, stubborn light I hadn't seen before, and the way she looked at me just then, it wasn't about the threat anymore. I didn't know what to do with that. But this changed everything. Croft laundering through a front was one thing. A forensic accountant digging into it, that was a death sentence. I closed the briefcase with a soft thud. Her refusal had just transformed her from a liability into a target with a purpose. My code demanded I protect the innocent. Her defiance made that duty impossible to ignore. The ghost of her unyielding stare still prickled against my skin like static. I stood in the storage unit's living area an hour later, the air thick with the smell of old cotton and my own cold, forgotten coffee. She hadn't moved from her cot. I took the spare pistol from my waistband and started field stripping it on the small table. The methodical clicks of the parts were the only sound. Her voice came from the cot, quiet and tired. "Why did you move closer to me before, in the safe house, when you gave me the phone?" My hands stilled on the slide of the gun. I hadn't expected her to remember that, or to ask. I kept my gaze on my work. "You were blocking the door," I said. It was the practical answer. The only one I had planned to give. The lie was thin and we both knew it. I had moved closer because for 1 second I saw the fear in her eyes and I wanted to shield it. I didn't say that. I reassembled the weapon, slow and precise. The overhead bulb hummed. "Silas Croft uses charities like laundries," I said, my voice dropping. "Clean money in, clean reputation out. If your brother was tracing the cash in, he found the rot." I placed the reassembled pistol on the table. "A blood oath isn't just loyalty, it's a cage. My territory is order. Croft's expansion is chaos." I looked at her then. "Your brother stuck his hand in the gears." She was quiet for a long time. I heard her shift on the cot. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear and tired, stripped of any accusation. "So which are you, the warden or the man in the cage?" I didn't look at her. There was no answer that would fit in that room. The question just hung there, fragile and new. I stood up and walked around the table, closer to her. We were only a few feet apart. The light threw my shadow toward her cot. She didn't shrink back. She just watched me, waiting. I saw that faint, tired line between her brows. I could have reached out. I didn't, and that one thing kept pulling at me. Why hadn't I? The sting of gun oil was still on my fingers, a phantom of the confession I'd made in that dim light. Later, I braced my hands on the cold steel of my desk. The absolute silence of my apartment was a stark contrast to the charged quiet we'd left behind. Elara sat across from me in my office chair. Exhaustion was a physical weight on her shoulders. She ignored my computer, pulled a small drive from her pocket, and plugged it into the wall port behind my desk without asking. Her fingers flew across her own laptop's keyboard. I watched the reflection of her screen in the dark window. It was a cascade of command lines I didn't recognize. Then a sharp, electronic chime broke the silence from my own monitor. A security alert flashed red. My network intrusion detection was screaming about unauthorized access. I was out of my chair in an instant. My hand closed around her wrist above the keyboard. Her bones felt fragile under my grip. Her skin was cool and dry. She didn't flinch. She just tilted her screen toward me. The security alerts on my monitor died as suddenly as they'd begun. Her screen now displayed a file directory. The header read, Croft Foundation Ledger. She shook off my hand with a sharp twist and pointed at the columns of data populating the spreadsheet. Financial records intermixed with shipping manifests for medical supplies. The destination addresses were all outreach centers in my territory. I recognized 3 as fronts I'd shut down last year. I stared at the data. My own digital walls had meant nothing to her. She'd walked right through them. I looked from the screen to her face. A faint, proud defiance tightened the line of her mouth. She had done what I could not. I leaned back against the edge of my desk, rubbing the tension from my jaw. The question wasn't about the data anymore. It was about the woman who'd retrieved it. She had a gun on her hip and blood on her hands, yet here she was, holding the key to gutting Silas Croft. "Your brother's audit," I said, my voice low. "Show me what he planned to do with it." Her eyes met mine. She clicked open a document titled Contingency. It was an email draft addressed to a federal investigator. The send date was set for the day after Leo disappeared. I put it away and got on with things, but why I'd flinched at that send date, it refused to stay put. My mouth still held that dry, metallic tang of shock from the ledger's first loaded rows. Now, hours later in the dark office, the only light came from those damning spreadsheets glowing across the screens. Elara sat rigid in the chair beside me, a pale ghost in the monitor glass. We hadn't spoken for a long time. The only sound was the hum of the servers in the next room. She finally broke the silence, her voice scraped raw. "Cross-reference these names." Her fingers moved. She pulled up a police database she shouldn't have had access to. Her brother, Leo, had built a backdoor. Rows of missing persons reports filled a new window. She ran the match. The percentage ticked upward. 60, 70. It settled at 78. She wrapped her arms around her own shoulders. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the number like it was a physical blow. "It's just collateral," I said. The words were automatic, a defense from my world. Croft expands, people get displaced, they run. Collateral. Her voice was low and dangerous. Then she slammed her hand flat on the steel desk. The crack echoed in the quiet room. "They're not displaced, they're people, look at the notes. Product selection. Client fulfillment." She turned to me then. Her eyes were wide and bright with furious grief. A vein pulsed hard in my own temple. I held her gaze for a long moment. Then I was the one who looked away first. I stood up abruptly. My chair rolled back and hit the wall. I turned my back to her and the horrible light of the screens. The words came out before I could stop them. They were quiet and stripped bare. "My younger sister went missing 10 years ago, from a neighborhood Croft had just moved into." I shut my mouth. The admission hung in the cool, dry air. I hadn't spoken of that to anyone in years. I felt her move behind me. She didn't touch me. She was just there, inches away. The air between us felt charged and still. I could hear her quiet breathing. I almost turned around. I almost reached for her. The warmth of her nearness was an ache in my chest. Then I stepped aside. I walked to the door and opened it. The gesture was a clear dismissal, but my earlier anger was gone. There was only a heavy, shared revulsion. She looked at me from across the room. She didn't move toward the door. She just waited. Whatever came next. Why I'd opened the door but she wouldn't leave was the part I hadn't figured out. The hum from the server room was still buzzing in my jaw, a low-grade ache I couldn't shake. My boots slipped a little on the cold, damp concrete of the garage floor. Marco and Luca were waiting for me under the fluorescent lights, standing at attention. I checked the slide on my spare pistol. The click was loud and final in the quiet. I gave them their orders, my voice flat. Luca was to watch the shelter from the ledger. Marco was to trace the shell company. They just nodded. No questions. Their loyalty was the one thing I could still count on. Then Alara stepped out of the stairwell shadow. She planted herself right between me and the car door. Her shoulders were set, hard. "I'm coming." Her voice was clear but thin, like ice about to break. Luca moved to block her, but I held up a hand. He stopped. I looked at her in that sick garage light. She was defiant, sure, but under that her eyes were bruised with a desperate kind of tired. "This is a blood oath matter," I told her, quieter now. "It's too dangerous." She didn't even blink. "Leo is my blood." Her voice broke on his name. It wasn't a challenge, it was just the truth. And it hit me, right then, why that send date for the audit had felt like a punch. It was his birthday. A cold fact from a background report, now living in her voice. I was the one who looked away. I reached into the open trunk, pulled out a compact vest, and tossed it to her. The weight of it made her stumble back a step. "You see violence, you hit the floor and stay down," I said. My tone left no room. I opened the passenger door for her. The dome light made her look so small, holding that vest. Was I protecting her or using her? In that garage mist, the line just vanished. She got in without another word. The controller's handshake still felt greasy on my skin. Parked in the van, I watched dust float in a single blade of sun cutting through the blinds. Marco was hunched over his laptop, a cable snarl around his feet. Alara sat on a metal crate behind him, perfectly still except for her foot, tapping a frantic rhythm on the floor. The signal was garbage, static and digital screaming. "It's being jammed at the source," Marco said, his voice tight. "I can try to isolate a carrier frequency." The pressure built behind my eyes. This was it, our only thread. The controller gave us a time for a drop, said a recording would confirm Leo's status. Now it was just noise. I glanced at Alara. She was staring at Marco's screen like she could force it clear with her will. A strand of hair had escaped her braid, stuck to her temple. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. I knew better. "Give me the raw feed," I said. Marco handed me a second headset. The sound was a physical assault, but underneath the screech, fragments, a man's voice strained, a word that might have been stable. Another like tonight. Alara's breath caught. She heard it too. Marco worked his magic and the screech lessened, just for a second. The voice came through, choked with fear. "The reporter knows. Transfer tonight. Waterfront." Then the signal died with a final hiss. I pulled the headphones off. The van was silent except for the fans. "That was Leo's voice," I said. It was a relief and a knife all at once. Alara's shoulders slumped for a second before she straightened them. She got it. We had confirmation he was alive. And we knew Croft was moving him. Now, Marco, I said, my voice all command. Triangulate every Croft waterfront asset, piers, warehouses, private docks, anything with activity for tonight. He nodded, his fingers already flying. Alara looked from him to me. Her eyes held the only question that mattered. I met her gaze and gave one slow nod. We were going. The pressure from the headset was still a dull ring in my skull. I blinked against the sting of ammonia and piss in the grimy stairwell. The waterfront night air was cold and damp. Alara stood by the rusted fire door, arms wrapped tight around herself. She stared at the green exit sign like it was lying. Marco's voice crackled in my ear again. Another dead-end warehouse. The list was long. The clock was a hammer on my spine. I pulled the earpiece out, rubbed the sore spot. My knuckles ached from clenching the railing. Alara turned at the sound. Her eyes were wide and dark in the bad light. No tears, that was worse. She was past fear. She was in that terrible, focused clarity now. He's not at any of the obvious places, I said. My voice echoed way too loud in the concrete space. The phone kept ringing, that shrill, ugly sound in that silent room. I looked at Alara. She looked at the phone. Neither of us moved. Finally, I picked it up. Talk. It was Luca. It was a voice I didn't know, low and calm. The ferry terminal is a show, a beautiful, efficient distraction. They're already moving him. By water, you're looking at the wrong dock. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. Alara was watching my face, reading the new tension there. Wrong place, she whispered. Wrong everything, I said. My mind was racing, tearing apart the plan I'd just laid out. A show, a distraction. Silas was smarter than I'd given him credit for. He was using my own logic against me. He knew I'd look for the efficient move, so he'd built a beautiful, obvious one and let me find it. I stood up. We have to go. Now. He didn't take my car. It was too clean, too known. We ran down the back stairs of that awful laundromat building and out into the wet alley. I flagged a cab, one of those old dented ones that smelled of cigarettes and old air freshener. I gave him an address 3 blocks from the main commercial piers. Alara sat stiffly beside me, her hands clenched in her lap. She stared out the window at the blur of neon and rain. Who was it? She asked, her voice barely audible over the engine. I don't know. And that was the truth that scared me. It wasn't an ally. It wasn't a foe. It was a third player. Someone who knew enough to warn me and enough to stay hidden. That meant the game was bigger than just Silas and me. The cab dropped us off. The rain had softened to a cold mist. The air here was different, heavier, saltier, with the underlying stench of dead fish and fuel oil. This was the real waterfront, not the renovated ferry terminals with their secure basements. This was the crumbling edge where things got lost. We moved between shadows, 2 ghosts in the damp night. My mind was a map, flipping through every dock, every slip Marco had flagged. Pier 12 was the beautiful lie, so where was the ugly truth? Then I saw it. Not a warehouse, not a pier with a sign. A rusted-out fishing trawler tied up at a dilapidated wooden dock. The name on the hull was faded, but I could just make it out. The Efficient Lady. A sick joke. A little flare of light from the cabin. Movement. I grabbed Alara's arm, pulling us behind a mountain of frayed netting. There, I breathed into her ear. She followed my gaze. Her body went still. That's it. That's it. It was perfect. It looked abandoned. It was surrounded by water. Easy to move, easy to hide, easy to sink if things went wrong. The most efficient move wasn't the shiny one, it was the invisible one. We watched. 2 men came up on deck. They weren't Silas's usual suits. They wore stained work clothes, blending into the dock. They were loading supplies. Boxes of what looked like medical gear. That was new. That was specific. Alara's breath hitched. She'd seen it too. They're keeping him alive for the transfer. It confirmed everything. Leo was a product. A living, breathing product to be delivered in good condition. The plan in my head reformed, harder and sharper. Snatching a lieutenant from a crowded dock was one thing. Extracting a prisoner from a boat was something else. The variables multiplied. The water. The engine. The fact that there was nowhere to run except into the harbor. I felt her hand find mine in the dark. Her fingers were ice cold, but her grip was fierce. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was stating a fact. We were here, together. The men finished loading and went back below deck. The dock was quiet again, just the slap of oily water against the pilings. This was the moment, the point of no return. We could call Marco, try to get back up, wait for a better angle. Or we could move now while the rhythm of their operation was steady, predictable. I looked at Alara. Her face was pale in the gloom, all sharp angles and shadow. She gave one slow, deliberate nod. She'd already decided. Waiting was a luxury we didn't have. So I made the call, not with a phone, with a gesture. A tilt of my head toward the trawler. And we stepped out from behind the nets, two shadows dissolving into a deeper dark, walking straight toward the heart of the efficient machine. The black sedan rolled onto the far end of the dock, and my whole world narrowed to its doors. Two guards got out first. Then they pulled a third figure from the back seat. Hooded, hands bound, my chest locked up tight. Alara made this small, choked sound beside me. It was Leo. This wasn't the plan. They were bringing the product right into the operational zone. The lieutenant I needed, a guy named Victor, stepped forward. He was Croft's head of logistics. He yanked the hood back. Leo's face was pale and bruised under the harsh lights. He looked dazed, but he was breathing. He was alive. This was it. My hand started to come up, the signal to my men ready in the shadows. Then Leo stumbled. The guards jerked him upright. His head turned, his eyes scanning the darkness, and they locked right onto our hiding spot behind the pallets. It was a desperate, instinctive look. One of the guards followed his gaze. His hand went to his weapon. He barked something sharp at Victor. Victor's head snapped toward us. The operation was blown. I dropped my hand and grabbed Alara's arm, yanking her down lower behind cover. My mind was racing, the whole equation rewritten in a second. A clean snatch was gone. A rescue now would be a bloody firefight on an open dock, and Leo was standing right in the middle of it. Victor shouted an order. The guards started shoving Leo toward the waiting speedboat. Workers scrambled to cast off the lines. I had seconds. The lieutenant was getting away with the map to Croft's whole pipeline, and Leo was being taken to a fate I couldn't allow. Alara turned to me. The rain was streaking her face. Her eyes weren't pleading. They were burning with this furious, terrifying clarity. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The moment was here. It was demanding a choice that would define everything that came after. But whether Leo actually saw me hiding there in the rain, I still had no answer for that. My knuckles ached from the desperate grip I'd kept on my sidearm as we slipped away. The key turned roughly in my apartment's deadbolt, the sound swallowed by the thick carpet in my study. The safe house was compromised, so I brought her to the one place Croft would never think to look. My own home. Alara stood in the center of the room, arms wrapped tight around herself. She stared at the rain-blurred city lights beyond the window. Her silence was worse than any scream. I moved to the desk and ejected the drive from the waterfront, the garbled audio. I plugged it into my secure laptop. The file was a mess of static and digital noise. I ran a basic decryption protocol. It gave me nothing but more distortion. "It's corrupted," I said. My voice sounded harsh in the quiet. "We need to analyze how they spotted us. That's the priority now." Alara turned from the window, her gaze fixed on the laptop screen. "That file is the only proof my brother was there. I don't care about your tactical review." She crossed the room before I could stop her. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, bypassing my security with a sequence I didn't recognize. She pulled up a forensic audio application from Leo's hidden cloud drive. "He built this for cleaning field recordings," she said, her voice thin with focus. She isolated a frequency band, filtering out the hiss. The process took minutes. The only sounds were the faint whir of the laptop fan and the distant sigh of the elevator in the building's core. I watched her work, the determined set of her mouth, and felt this sharp, unwelcome ache. She was so deep in my world now, and the light she carried seemed impossible to put out. Then a clear voice crackled from the speakers. A man said, "Take the package to the old cannery on Pier 12. The councilman wants to see it handled personally." The sentence just hung there in the air. Alara's hands went still on the desk. Her shoulders lifted with a sharp, shallow breath. I knew the voice. Silas Croft's head of security, a guy named Vogel. But the content? That was the detonation. The councilman meant her father. Councilman Vance wasn't just cutting deals. He was giving direct orders on the disposal of evidence. On the disposal of her brother. My own anger was a cold, solid weight in my chest. I knew the corruption went deep. I didn't know it was this intimate, this vile. Alara looked at me. Her eyes were dry and terribly clear. "Pier 12, she said. It wasn't a question, it was a destination. I gave a single, curt nod. The political betrayal was now an audible fact. This changed everything. Croft was one thing, a councilman directing a Black Ops transfer was another. It meant layers of protection we hadn't accounted for. It meant the police weren't just blind, they were complicit. My mind started cataloging assets, planning routes, weighing the immense risk. She was already reaching for her jacket, her movements precise and fatalistic. This was the path, narrow and dark, that we were now fated to walk. There was no turning back. The rest made sense. Why I'd heard Croft's own voice on the tape. That part didn't. My jaw ached from clenching it during that final, damning playback. The sharp, briny scent of the cannery's concrete office cut through the lingering taste of my own fury. I looked away from the computer screen toward the window. The councilman's voice meant this was no longer a simple grab. It was a declaration of war from the city itself. Alara stood by the door, her silhouette rigid against the gray light. She had heard it too. Her silence was a heavier weight than any plea. And then Silas Croft, my rival, stepped into the office. He wore an expensive wool coat against the damp chill. His cold gray eyes took in the scene with a politician's calm. "Dante," he said. His voice was smooth as poured oil. "You brought a guest to my facility." He didn't look at Alara, but his meaning was clear. I moved to place myself between them. The spare pistol was a hard weight against my lower back. "Your hospitality needs work, Silas. Your guests tend to disappear." Her question hung in the air between us, cold and absolute. "Only the rude ones," Silas said. He smiled without any warmth at all. "You should have accepted my offer. Order and chaos can coexist. You keep your dusty little territory. I expand into the future." He finally let his gaze slide over to Alara. "But you brought sentiment into the business. That is a fatal error." My hand wanted to reach for the gun at my back. I kept it still at my side. Love didn't change what I was. It only made the idea of leaving it all behind so much harder, and I saw the calculation in his eyes then. He wasn't just here for Leo. He was here for her because she mattered to me. That made her a target. The door behind Silas opened again. Two of his men brought Leo Finch inside. Alara's brother was pale, leaning heavily on one of them. A dark bruise bloomed across his cheekbone. His glasses were gone. His eyes found Alara first, wide with pure panic. Then they found me. A raw, unfiltered hatred tightened his whole face. He pulled against the guard's grip. "Alara, run!" he shouted. His voice was ragged, torn. "He's one of them. He was there in the rain watching them take me." The truth of it hit me right in the chest. It left my hands shaking. He had seen me that night. I'd chosen to watch from the shadows, to gather intelligence instead of acting. I'd chosen the mission over the person. I saw the exact moment Alara understood. Her breath caught in a sharp, quiet gasp. She looked from Leo's accusing face to mine. Her own face went completely blank with the shock of it. Silas watched this fracture with clear satisfaction. "You see," he said to me, his voice soft. "You cannot protect anything. You are a ghost in your own story." He nodded to his men. They began to pull Leo back toward the door. Alara took a step forward. I reached out and caught her wrist to stop her. My grip was firm, but my thumb pressed against the rapid pulse beating there. It was an apology I could not speak. She didn't try to pull away. She just stared at my hand on her wrist, then up at my face. Her eyes held a terrible, silent question. I had no answer to give. Silas turned to leave, his point made. He paused at the threshold and looked back. "The councilman expects a resolution by dawn. I will give him one." His cold eyes settled on me. "You can choose which sibling you bring to that meeting." Then he was gone, and his men with him, taking Leo back into the gloom of the hallway. The choice he'd given me moved with me, a cold weight in my gut. The memory of his handshake lingered in my own palm like a coating of dust. By the third morning, I was leaning against a sun-warmed brick wall, the coarse grit catching on my jacket sleeve. The cannery's side door was 20 paces away. Marco's voice crackled in my ear. He said the councilman's car had just arrived. I flexed my hand and felt the phantom grit of that handshake. I finally understood. I'd heard Croft's voice on the tape because he was here, right now. He'd come to collect his payment personally. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old fish and diesel. Silas Croft stood near a rusted conveyor belt. His suit was too sharp for all the grime. Councilman Vance, Alara's uncle, a man with a weak chin and very expensive glasses, fidgeted beside him. They faced Leo Finch. He was tied to a metal chair. One of his eyes was swollen shut. The other held a clear and terrible understanding. He knew why he was here. I watched from behind a stack of wooden pallets. Alara was a tense shadow at my side. Her breath hitched when she saw her brother. I saw the line of her throat tight. That was the only sound she made. Silas spoke. His voice was a calm scratch in the large, hollow space. "The permits are just paper," he said. "Trust requires a shared memory." He placed a pistol in the councilman's limp hand. Vance looked at the gun like it was a dead animal. Silas didn't force his finger onto the trigger. He simply said, "You must bear witness. You must give the order yourself." The councilman's shoulders slumped. He gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod to the two guards by the door. "Make it clean," he whispered. Leo closed his good eye. He accepted his fate. I moved then. My spare pistol was already in my hand. I stepped from the shadows into a slant of dusty light. Silas Croft saw me first. A slow smile spread across his face. It did not reach his cold gray eyes. "Dante," he said, like it was a friendly greeting. "I wondered when you would come to collect your stray." I kept my aim on the guard nearest Leo. "This isn't your territory," I said. My voice echoed slightly in the vast room. "The dead is called." Alara rushed past me toward her brother. One of the guards shifted his weight, his hand going to his hip. I fired a single warning shot into the rusted machinery above his head. The metallic ring shuddered through the entire cannery, a deafening gong. In that frozen echo, I knew this was the only path. Some encounters lock the future into place. What had really happened in that restaurant hallway? That wasn't going away. It had led us here. The metallic taste of dread still coated the back of my tongue, thick and stubborn as drying blood. I pushed open my apartment door hours later to find the living room air thick with the sharp, chemical smell of heated printer toner. Paper was scattered everywhere. Alara stood by my desk, her back to me. She held the gun I had left there. The safe behind her hung open and empty. My files on Councilman Vance were spread across the floor like fallen leaves. I stopped inside the doorway. I let the door swing shut with a soft click behind me. She did not turn around. Her shoulders were set in a hard, unyielding line. I saw the note, the one with the cannery address from my car, crumpled in her other hand. I took a slow breath to steady my voice. The quiet in the room felt dangerous, like a held breath. "You took the proof," I said. She finally turned. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She looked at me with a clarity that cut deeper than any accusation. She had crossed a line I never thought she would reach. "You knew he gave the order," she said. Her voice was flat, emptied of all the fear I'd expected to hear. "You had the audio, you had the files, and you were still just planning to grab one of Silas's lieutenants." I moved further into the room. I stopped a few feet from her. The space between us felt charged like before a storm. I could see the pulse fluttering in her throat. I could smell the faint, clean scent of her shampoo under the chemical burn of the toner. "A map gets you further than a martyr," I said, but the words sounded hollow, even to me. She shook her head once. A strand of hair stuck to her damp temple. "You asked me once which sibling I'd bring to the dawn." She lifted the gun, not at me, but to show it. "I'm bringing mine. Your way leaves him in the dark." I saw the decision in her posture. It wasn't a plea, it was a statement. In that moment, I felt the last of my control slip. My hand lifted, as if by instinct, to gently halt her. Not to take the gun, just to stop her. I let it fall back to my side. We stood there in the ruined quiet of my apartment. The scattered papers were a testament to my failures. She was close enough that I could see the faint dusting of flour from the safe house counter on her sleeve. I wanted to tell her the fear wasn't for my empire. The words stuck in my throat. I just looked at her. She looked back, waiting for a move I would not make. Then she turned and walked out. The door didn't slam. It sighed shut. The silence after was absolute. The ache in my knuckles from slamming the wall pulsed with every heartbeat as I crouched in the dark. The inside of the shipping container smelled of damp rust and something sickly sweet, like rotting fruit left in the heat. I saw her through a crack in the container door. Alara was behind a generator across the floodlit yard. Her face was pale in the harsh light as she stared at the cannery office window. My spare pistol was a cold weight against my ribs. I knew I had only seconds before the world exploded. Silas Croft walked into the office with the councilman. He placed a fatherly hand on Leo's shoulder. Leo was tied to a chair, his head slumped forward. Silas's other hand held a pistol loosely at his side. Councilman Vance mopped his brow with a handkerchief. My code demanded I let this play out. Capturing the lieutenant was the strategic move, but Alara's brother was in that chair. Her rules were crumbling right in front of her. Her fingers curled into fists so tight her knuckles turned bone white. She pressed her forehead against the generator's metal casing. The math was simple: one life against the whole operation. I had preached that cold logic to her myself. Now, seeing her wrestle with it made my throat tight. She closed her eyes for one long moment. When they opened, they held a shattered kind of resolve. She was going to do something stupid and brave and get herself killed. Her hand moved to her belt. She pulled a cylinder free. A smoke grenade from my own armory. She was choosing him. She was choosing the one person over the greater good. I saw her thumb find the pin. My breath stopped in my chest. This was the moment her path changed forever. This was the moment I had to change mine. I pushed the container door open a silent inch. The hinge groaned softly. The sound was lost in the yard's hum. The cold bite of the shipping container's steel still pressed against my spine as I slid out from behind it. And here's where it gets crazy. Before me, the chaotic yard erupted with the shrill, metallic scream of the fire alarm I had just pulled. A guard on the east wall stopped his patrol. He tilted his head, listening to the new chaos. I froze in the deep shadows between two stacks of pallets. My team, Marco and Luca, held their breath behind me. The guard raised his radio to his mouth. I slowly raised my silenced pistol and centered the sight on his chest. The taste of old copper filled my mouth. His voice crackled over the radio frequency we were monitoring. "Check the south alley for the source," he said. Routine, not a direct alert. I lowered my gun by a fraction. But then the guard turned his head. He looked right at our hiding spot. His eyes scanned the darkness where we stood completely still. My fingers grew cold around the pistol grip. I didn't even blink, willing him to see nothing but more shadows. A scrawny tabby cat yowled from inside a nearby dumpster. The sound was sharp and sudden. The guard laughed into his radio and turned away. The turning point was nothing but a stray cat. I signaled my team with a sharp gesture. They slipped past the guard's position one by one. Marco moved with a heavy grace. We reached the rusted steel service door in the perimeter fence. I worked the old lock with a set of picks from my pocket. The mechanism gave way with a soft click. The space inside the fence was dark and far too quiet. This silence felt like a held breath. Was this a trap, or had Alara already set everything off? I pushed the door open, my gun leading the way. Strobe lights from the alarm pulsed across the wet asphalt. Guards scrambled in confusion toward the main warehouse. Then a man in an expensive overcoat bolted from a side door. He ran blindly, his face a mask of pure panic. He crashed directly into Marco's path. Marco, a solid wall of muscle, grabbed him and yanked him into the shadows. The man struggled wildly. I stepped forward and pulled the scarf from his face. It was Councilman Vance, his perfectly styled hair now disheveled. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. The clean and quiet rescue was now a loud and messy crisis. I saw the raw fear in his eyes, and for a single second I wondered if Alara saw that same look in mine. The frantic thrum of the alarm still vibrated deep in my ears as we shoved Councilman Vance forward. We pressed him against the cold corrugated metal of a warehouse wall. The air was thick with the chemical stink of sprinkler water and raw panic. I pushed him toward Marco, and then I saw her, Alara, vanishing behind a stack of pallets. My chest seized. I followed her trail through the smoke. Boots stomped past a supply closet door. I yanked it open and stepped into the dark, closing us in. Alara was pressed against the back wall. Her shoulders rose and fell with fast, shallow breaths. The only light came from a thin crack under the door. "You blew the mission," I whispered. The words were hard, but my pulse hammered in my neck. I saw her eyes widen, reflecting that sliver of light. She saw the fear I couldn't hide. I ran a hand over my mouth, the taste of adrenaline sharp on my tongue. "I had to try," she breathed. Her voice was small in the cramped dark. I looked down at my own hands. My knuckles were split and bloody from clearing a path to her. She saw them too. I'd fought for the mission, but I'd run for her. I felt the warmth of her arm through the fabric of my jacket, our shoulders touching in the tight space. Outside, the guards doubled back. Their voices growled, right on the other side of that thin door. I looked at the handle, then at Alara. My hand reached for her arm. The urge to draw her closer was a pure reflex. I stopped my fingers just before they touched her sleeve. The choice was right here. Leave her hidden and salvage the operation, or claim her and burn the whole plan down. I dropped my hand and turned back to the door. My decision was made. Why I dropped my hand before touching her? That would come back to haunt me. The ache in my knuckles pulsed with every heartbeat. The holding cell corridor stank of stale fish and damp concrete, a cold reek that cut straight through the smoke clinging to my clothes. I pushed Alara behind a stack of rusted metal drums just as muzzle flashes lit the far end of the passage. Marco returned fire from a doorway. The sharp crack of rounds hitting steel filled the air. I leaned out and fired 3 measured shots. A man in a dark jacket slumped against the wall. That familiar cold focus settled over me, the kind that made the world narrow to just targets and angles. Then I saw Alara's hand trembling where she gripped her weapon. The sight was a needle of heat in my chest. That guy had a gun on his hip and blood on his hands, but her fear was the only thing that mattered right then. We moved forward in a crouch, Marco covering our advance. The last guard panicked. He broke from his cover, firing wild. A round sparked off a pipe near Alara's head. I shoved her down hard and put 2 bullets in the guard's center mass. He folded to the wet floor. The sudden silence was heavy. My ears rang. I scanned the cell doors until I saw one with a fresh electronic keypad. A red light glowed above it. Alara saw it too, and her breath hitched. She ran to it, pressing her hands against the cold steel. "Leo," she called, her voice tight. A weak thump answered from the other side. Marco knelt by the lock, pulling a small brick of plastic explosive from his vest. "Shaped charge," he grunted. "Stand clear." As Marco worked, I kept my eyes on the corridor. And that's when I saw it. Movement flickered in a side passage to my left. I shifted my stance, bringing my pistol up. Councilman Vance stumbled into view. His expensive suit was filthy and torn now. 2 of his personal bodyguards flanked him, hands on their weapons. They hadn't seen us yet. They were fleeing toward a distant emergency exit. The decision carved itself in my mind with perfect, brutal clarity. This was the man who gave the order. This was the source. Letting him escape was not an option. I looked back at Alara. She was watching Marco, her entire being focused on that door. I saw the line of her jaw set with a desperate hope. My own voice sounded foreign to me when I spoke. "Get him out," I said to her. I didn't wait for her reaction. I turned and broke into a run, leaving my team behind, and went after the councilman alone. What Dante had muttered under his breath earlier, it moved with me now. I found myself crammed into a cramped maintenance closet later, a single bare bulb overhead humming a frantic, electrical whine. I'd shoved Alara and her brother inside after the corridor finally went quiet. The door clicked shut, and the world narrowed to just the 3 of us. Leo Finch slumped against a shelf of cleaning supplies. His face was a mess of bruises and dried blood. Alara knelt beside him, her hands already tearing a strip from the hem of her shirt. Her movements were quick and desperate. I stood with my back against the door, listening. The space was so small my shoulder almost touched a mop bucket. The chemical smell of industrial cleaner filled my lungs. She pressed the cloth to a cut on her brother's